Welcome to Doctors Unbound, your show devoted to doctors who are, well, unbound by physician stereotypes. Get a behind-the-scenes look at doctors that are breaking the mold and breaking into the worlds of technology, writing, investing, politics, just to name a few. This is Doctors Unbound, where you'll hear from experts with the insights to help you go to the next level. Let's get this show started. Here is your host, Dr. Dave Draginas.
If you've paid any attention to the intro to this show, then you know that I've been interested in bringing you conversations with physicians that are impacting our nation's policies through politics at state and national levels. Well, I am super excited to tell you that today's podcast episode does just that. I was fortunate enough to meet our next guest in person, though as you might expect for a United States Congressman, their time is very limited. So I ditched the typical show format because there just wasn't any time for that. We got right to the meat of the discussion, and Andy was gracious enough to answer 5 or 6 questions for us pertaining to physicians and politics and our nation's issues going forward. So including in our talk was some of the biggest differences he's seen between medicine and politics, and his advice to doctors considering a political career. After you listen to this episode, please visit andyharris.com. That's ANDYHARRIS.com, andyharris.com, to support his campaign. Regardless of whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or have some other party affiliation, we need more good people and more physicians that really understand healthcare in Congress, shaping our nation's policies. So without further delay, he's a physician, has been an officer in the US Navy, and now has the distinction of being a US Congressman. Here is my interview with Dr. Andy Harris. Welcome to another episode of Doctors Unbound. I've got a special guest today. He is a physician, has been an officer in the US Navy, and is now a member of Congress. Quite the resume, even among our podcast guests. Dr. Andy Harris, welcome to the show.
It's good to be with you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It was kind of short notice, but we've got you here. And I wanted to start off with us getting a little bit of a background on your medical career. You spent some time at Hopkins. You were also in the Navy as well, right?
That's right. I was on the faculty at Hopkins. I was the director of obstetric anesthesiology for 15 years there. And about 4 years after I started on the faculty, I also became a direct commissioned reservist in the Naval Reserve. Stayed in the reserve for 17 years. Active for only about 5 or 6, but I've had a great time both in academic medicine as well as for a brief time in military medicine. Very awesome.
I got to spend some time in the military. I got to take care of our bravest and our finest, and it was really a privilege to be able to take care of them. At what point did you start considering a career in politics?
Well, I'd always been interested. My background, my parents were refugees from Eastern European communism, so politics was frequently the talk at the dinner table. But I had a medical career, got started in my medical career, and then because I was always interested in policy, during the 1980s, the policy became more and more important. And then in the early 90s, with HMOs, with all the threats to the way we were taught to deliver medical care, it became so clear that government was going to interfere with that, that I decided to toss my hat in the ring for a state Senate race and won the office in 1998.
Well, congratulations. That's awesome. I think it's so important to get more physicians and people with healthcare experience into politics, especially as our healthcare industry or our medical care has undergone so many changes these days. What are some of the biggest differences that you've noticed between a career in medicine and then as you moved on to a career running for office and in politics?
I think the biggest difference really lies in the difference between medicine and policy and politics or political science. And I always tell people, and physicians understand this, medicine is a natural science. You have to have done all the natural sciences, math, calculus, chemistry, all that. And as I tell people, 2 plus 2 is always equal to 4. For any given patient with an illness, there is a right answer and all the other answers.
Right.
Okay? Very different when you go into politics. Politics is social science. It has gray. 2 plus 2 does not always equal 4. In my very first year in the state Senate, I asked one of the chairmen after a contentious floor debate where I think the answer was obvious based on objective evidence and turned out the other way after the vote. I asked him, how do you know if you did the right thing? Now, we have 47 state senators in Maryland. He looked at me and he said, Andy, the right answer is whatever 24 senators say on a given day. I'm sorry, that's just not the way I was trained. I was trained so that everything has to be highly objective, and it's not that way. And I think that's frustrating for someone with a medical background who goes into politics because they're frustrations.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I think that mindset definitely would be frustrating for a lot of physicians. What are some of the biggest issues that you're working on in Congress in this coming year? What are kind of some big things that are going on there?
I think overall, in perspective, and I'll just have domestic policy. Obviously, foreign policy, the president, administration take care of that. But in terms of domestic policy, I think we have to get the budget right and the budgeting right and our debt and our deficit right. Everyone who has a household, everyone who's in a business understands that you've got to, the income has to equal the outflow. But in Washington, it doesn't work that way. We've built up a $20 trillion debt. And physicians are kind of caught in the crossfire because the budgeting is going to rapidly become a zero-sum game. As you spend more money on something, and I don't care whether it's defense or Social Security or whatever, it's going to have to come from somewhere else in the budget. And one of the most attractive targets right now is to go into Medicare, Medicaid, or some of the other government-funded programs and just decrease government expenditure. Now, the politics is you can't decrease government expenditure and restrict access because rationing is not going to go over well. So what they end up doing is they end up just decreasing payment to providers, and that's whether it's a hospital or a physician. They're gonna look to make health care bear the brunt, I think, of budget cuts. And therefore, as we look toward health care reform, as we look toward managing the increasing growth in Medicare and Medicaid and the other federal healthcare costs, like the Federal Employee Health Benefits Plan, the Indian Health Service, things like that, VA medicine, we're going to have to make certain that physicians don't come out on the short end of that stick, because traditionally physicians have not had a good active presence in Washington or in state capitals. That's changed a lot over the last 10 years, but traditionally they're not in the position that some of the other interest groups are. So we've got to keep an eye on that, because in the end, I firmly believe that physicians, the key to controlling healthcare costs lies with the physicians, because they're the ones who understand patients. They understand what works, what doesn't. They're the ones who control cost instead of some externally applied, really, price controls.
Well, on behalf of the physicians out there on the front line, I want to thank you for fighting not only for physicians in Congress, but also for patients, because, I think by and large, most physicians, we got into this field because we want to positively impact patient care. So I really want to thank you for doing everything you can in Congress for patients, for physicians, and to try and preserve and improve the healthcare system that we have.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. When I say physicians or healthcare providers, that's shorthand for patients.
Absolutely,
it is physicians and their patients against the insurance companies and the government intervention. So, what's good for physicians, I strongly believe in the end, is going to be very good for patients.
Agreed. Any advice to physicians out there who maybe are looking out there and are considering throwing their hat in a political race and making a go of something like that?
It's a great question. It comes up all the time. I meet, especially with people who are just finishing their training, or maybe they're even in their residency. And they're just, they're chomping at the bit to get into politics. My advice to them is first establish a career, establish the credentials that will make you a viable candidate almost immediately. Why do I say that? The trust for physicians is still very, very high by the public. And that makes sense. Look, people's health care is foremost on their minds. They know that physicians take care of them. Their physicians are interested in them, and therefore there's trust. They are viewed also as outsiders of the political realm, and outsiders are in right now. So what I would advise them is establish a career, but keep an eye on the politics in your local area, because you will have to enter through politics in your local area. Keep an eye, get involved, but your career comes first.
Gotcha. Well, I think that's very sound advice. We're going to wrap things up here because we don't have a lot of time. How can listeners support you and your campaign?
Well, they can go to the campaign website. It's simple. It's www.andyharris.com, andyharris.com, and all the information is there.
Perfect so much, and we'll be sure to link that into our show notes on the website. And I just want to thank you again, Dr. Harris, for coming on the podcast, for making the time. I know you're super busy. And thank you on behalf of all the physicians out there for fighting for us and fighting for our patients.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Thank you for listening to Doctors Unbound podcast. Remember to head over to DoctorsUnbound.com to access all the show notes and resources discussed in this episode. Now, it's your turn to be unbound.